My ex-wife wants me to be her lover since she left me for a rich old man, but I told him about it, and now she's lonely. I'm 38, living what I'd call a quiet and steady life in Chicago. I work as a financial consultant, and while my job is demanding, I've always made time for personal stability. My ex-wife, Laura, is 36, someone who once shared this life with me. We were married for 6 years before it all fell apart 3 years ago. When we divorced, she left me for Gregory, a wealthy man in his early 60s who made his money in real estate. At the time, it hurt like hell, but I've since moved on, or at least I thought I had, until this week. He hadn't seen Laura in nearly a year, but fate, or bad luck, had different plans that afternoon. The downtown cafe was packed, so I wasn't expecting to hear my name floating over the noise. But there she was, calling out to me like we were old friends who hadn't missed a beat. She didn't wait for an invitation and slid into the chair across from me, her presence as casual as if we'd planned the meeting. She looked good. Too good, in that familiar, calculated way she always had. Hair perfectly styled, makeup understated but flawless, her smile just wide enough to feel intentional. I kept the conversation light at first, small talk about the weather, work, the usual pleasantries. But she wasn't there to discuss pleasantries. I could feel it in the way her eyes lingered, her hand grazing the table between us as though it could reach across the emotional canyon she'd left in her wake, and then she said it. She admitted she missed what we had. She didn't say it outright at first. Laura was never the type to come in guns blazing. Instead, she tiptoed around it, dropping breadcrumbs about Gregory being distant and things not being the same anymore. She claimed that her marriage had grown cold, that he wasn't the man she'd once thought he was. And then, like it was the most natural thing in the world, she said she wanted me back in her life. At first, I thought she meant something harmless, rekindling a friendship, maybe. But Laura didn't deal in harmless things. She always wanted more, and sure enough, she clarified. She didn't just want to catch up over coffee. She wanted me to be her lover. She said Gregory couldn't satisfy her anymore, that their intimacy had dried up, and she missed the way I had made her feel alive. I didn't say anything at first. I let her words hang there, let the absurdity of the situation settle in the air like heavy smoke. When I finally responded, it wasn't out of shock, it was out of disbelief. I reminded her, not kindly, that she'd left me for him. She didn't flinch. She said it was a mistake. She claimed that she'd been wrong, that she should have realized sooner what she was giving up. But she hadn't realized anything then, and I wasn't about to let her rewrite history for her convenience. Still, she pressed on, insisting that we could be discreet, that Gregory wouldn't find out. She painted a picture of stolen moments, of excitement and passion hidden in the shadows. She made it sound thrilling. But all I could think about was how pathetic it was. She didn't care about what she'd done to me back then. She didn't even apologize. She only cared about what she could get from me now. I asked her, point blank, what she thought would happen if Gregory found out. She waved the concern away as if it were irrelevant. She said she'd handle it, that I didn't need to worry. The way she said it, like it was a guarantee, made me realize just how long she'd been planning this conversation. She hadn't come here on a whim. She'd rehearsed this. I didn't yell. I didn't storm out. I didn't even let her see the anger building in my chest. I sat there, calm and composed, as she leaned in closer and whispered that we could have what we used to have. All we had to do was keep it a secret. I didn't give her an answer right away. I told her I needed time to think about it, and for a moment, she seemed relieved, as if she believed she'd already won. She brushed her fingers against my arm as she stood to leave, telling me not to take too long. I watched her walk out of the cafe, and instead of feeling the pull of nostalgia she'd hoped to ignite, I felt nothing but disgust. She wanted me to be her backup plan, the safety net for the mess she'd made, and I knew exactly what I needed to do. I met Laura when I was 26, ambitious and career-focused, with little time for distractions. But Laura wasn't a distraction, she was a whirlwind. We met at an engagement party, and within a year, we were living together in a sleek downtown apartment. She had charm, ambition, and a way of making me feel like we were destined for something big. But as time passed, I realized we wanted different things. I was focused on building a future, while Laura drifted between jobs, parties, and friends. When Gregory entered the picture, I didn't think twice about it. He was older, wealthy, and part of our social circle. I didn't see the betrayal coming. One night, she calmly told me she'd been seeing him and was leaving. No argument, no tears, just a suitcase packed and the door closing behind her. The divorce came fast, funded by Gregory's money, and within months she was living the life she'd chosen. I spiraled for a while, but therapy and work pulled me back. I rebuilt my life, stronger and wiser. And now, after years of silence, here she was, asking me to be the man she betrayed for the man she'd left me for. But this time, I wasn't the same man when I left the cafe. My mind was racing. I couldn't shake the audacity of what she just proposed. It wasn't just a proposition, it was the lack of remorse, the way she spoke as if she could simply snap her fingers and have me again. But that wasn't going to happen. Still, I wasn't done with this conversation. I needed to understand what kind of person I'd been married to and why she thought I'd ever agree to her plan. So, later that evening I called her. She picked up on the second ring, her voice soft, probably thinking I was about to give in. I kept my tone casual, asking her why she really wanted this. She didn't hesitate. She said Gregory was getting older, distant, and uninspiring, and she missed the fire we had. She claimed I'd always understood her in ways no one else did. That was her pitch, nostalgia wrapped in selfish longing. I didn't buy it. I told her it sounded more like she wanted an escape from a marriage she wasn't brave enough to leave. There was a pause on her end, and for a moment, I thought I'd struck a nerve. But she recovered, telling me that Gregory would never have to know. She said we could keep things discreet, just between us. The way she spoke, so confident, so sure I'd want to be her secret, made my decision easy. I let her talk a little longer, giving her just enough rope. Then, without any warning, I told her I'd be reaching out to Gregory. Her breath hitched. She tried to backtrack, but it was too late. I said goodbye and hung up, knowing exactly what I needed to do next. I sat in my apartment with my phone in hand, debating for all of 30 seconds before dialing Gregory's number. The thought of letting Laura play both of us was enough to make my blood boil. She didn't get to walk into my life, stir things up, and leave without consequences. If she wanted to live a double life, she'd have to face the fallout. The phone rang a few times before Gregory answered. His voice was groggy, like I'd woken him up or interrupted a quiet evening. He was polite at first, but the second I introduced myself, I could hear his tone change, the tension creeping in. He didn't ask why I was calling. He probably already suspected it wasn't good. I told him I wouldn't take much of his time, but he needed to hear what I had to say. I explained, calmly and clearly, that Laura had reached out to me earlier that day. I told him she wasn't just looking to catch up or talk about old memories. She wanted something far more dangerous. She'd asked me to be her lover, saying he wasn't satisfying her anymore and that she missed the passion we used to have. I described how she painted a picture of secret meetups and guaranteed discretion, promising that he'd never know. For a moment he didn't say anything. I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line, each inhale sharp and measured like he was trying to hold something back. I didn't let the silence bother me. I knew the weight of what I just dropped on him was enough to keep him locked in thought. Then, in a voice that was calm but strained, he asked me why I was telling him. It wasn't an accusation. It was genuine confusion, like he couldn't understand why I'd blow up Laura's plan instead of going along with it. I told him the truth. I wasn't calling to be a hero or to get revenge. I was calling because I refused to be anyone's fallback option. Laura had made her choice when she left me, and I wasn't going to let her drag me into her mess now that things weren't going her way. She wanted me to be her escape, her safety net. I wasn't interested in that role. Gregory exhaled slowly, the kind of breath someone takes when they're trying to process a hard truth. I could almost hear the wheels turning in his head, piecing together everything I'd just told him. Maybe he was recalling the late nights Laura had been out, or the excuses she'd given for why their intimacy had faded. Whatever was going through his mind, I didn't care. I'd said what I needed to say. I ended the call by telling him he deserved to know the truth and that what he did with it was up to him. He didn't yell, didn't argue, and didn't accuse me of lying. He simply thanked me, his voice quiet and distant, and hung up. As I set my phone down, I didn't feel triumphant or vengeful. I felt relief. Whatever happened next, it wasn't my burden anymore. Laura had rolled the dice, and now she'd have to live with the result. It didn't take long for the fallout to reach her. The next morning, I woke to 3 missed calls from Laura and a flurry of texts ranging from confused to panicked. At first, she was asking if I'd spoken to Gregory. By the third text, she knew the answer. Her messages became desperate. Please to talk, to explain, to fix things before they spiraled out of control. I ignored them all. Around noon, she showed up at my apartment, banging on the door loud enough to make my neighbor's dog bark. I knew this confrontation was inevitable, so I took a deep breath and opened the door. She stood there, hair disheveled and eyes puffy like she'd been crying. She didn't wait for an invitation to come in. She pushed past me and stormed into the living room. "You told him, didn't you?" she demanded, her voice shaking. I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, and nodded. I wasn't going to deny it. She already knew the truth. Her hands trembled as she paced the room, trying to piece together what to say. She asked me how I could do this to her, as if I'd betrayed her instead of the other way around. I let her rant for a while, listing off the fallout. Gregory was furious. She wasn't sure if their marriage could survive this, and he was threatening to throw her out of the house. When she finally stopped to catch her breath, I told her calmly that she'd made her bed and now she had to lie in it. I reminded her that she was the one who had shown up at that cafe and suggested this ridiculous plan, not me. I wasn't the one who broke vows. I wasn't the one who thought I could have it all without consequences. She slumped onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. For a moment, I thought she was going to cry, but instead, she lifted her head and stared at me, anger replacing the vulnerability. She accused me of doing this to get back at her for the past, for leaving me. I laughed, shaking my head. This wasn't revenge. This wasn't about punishing her for what she'd done years ago. This was about standing up for myself, about refusing to be the fool she could manipulate whenever her life got inconvenient. She tried to switch tactics, softening her voice and pleading with me to help her fix things. She claimed she still cared about me, that she didn't want to lose everything. But I saw through it. I told her she wasn't here because she cared. She was here because she didn't like losing. When it became clear that I wasn't going to bend, her desperation turned into bitterness. She said I'd regret this, that I was throwing away any chance of reconciliation. I smiled, told her I'd made peace with that a long time ago, and opened the door for her to leave. She hesitated, like she thought I might stop her, but when I didn't, she walked out without another word. I closed the door and locked it behind her, feeling lighter than I had in years. Laura wasn't my problem anymore. A few days passed in silence. No texts, no calls. It was strange at first, considering how chaotic the last few days had been, but the quiet was welcome. I knew things were unraveling on Laura's end, though. I didn't need to hear it from her. She had too much riding on her perfect life with Gregory, and now that facade was crumbling. On the 4th day, I heard from an old mutual friend. He asked if I'd heard the news. Gregory had kicked Laura out of their mansion. She'd been seen moving into a small apartment downtown, the kind of place she used to scoff at when we were married. I could almost picture the look on her face as she realized her safety net had vanished. Apparently, Gregory wasn't interested in reconciliation. He had a reputation to protect, and an unfaithful wife didn't fit into his carefully curated world. Word had spread quickly through their social circles, and Laura's once perfect image had taken a hit. People who once praised her were suddenly too busy to take her calls. The very lifestyle she traded me for was slipping through her fingers, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Part of me expected to feel satisfaction. But as I sat in my apartment that evening, scrolling through messages from friends who were eager to share every juicy detail, I realized I didn't feel triumphant. I felt free. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about watching her life fall apart. It was about closing a chapter one thought would haunt me forever. She had tried to pull me back into her world of lies and manipulation, but I hadn't let her. That was the victory. As I sat there, I deleted every text, every voicemail, and every memory tied to Laura. She wasn't part of my life anymore. I had no interest in being updated on her downfall. I had my own life to live, and for the first time in years, it felt like it was truly mine again. I poured myself a drink, leaned back on the couch, and let the weight of the past lift from my shoulders. A week later, I was walking through the park, the crisp autumn air cutting through the noise of the city, when my phone buzzed in my pocket. I didn't need to look to know it was her. For a moment, I considered ignoring it, letting it fade into the background like the rest of her. But curiosity got the better of me. Her voice was quiet, defeated, like she'd run out of the confidence that used to fuel her. She told me she was lonely, that everything she thought she wanted had slipped away. Gregory was gone, her friends were avoiding her, and she admitted that she didn't know what to do next. She asked if there was any part of me that could forgive her, if we could at least talk, maybe start over. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel sympathy. I felt nothing. She'd built this reality for herself, brick by brick. I wasn't going to help her tear it down just so she could start again with me as her fallback. So, I told her that I had moved on. I told her I wished her the best, but I wasn't interested in revisiting the past. There was no dramatic ending, no screaming or tears. Just a calm, quiet understanding that we were done. As I ended the call and slipped the phone back into my pocket, I took a deep breath and kept walking. The city stretched out ahead of me, full of opportunities that had nothing to do with her. For the first time in years, I wasn't looking back. Laura wasn't my ending. She was just a lesson, and I had finally learned it.